Good morning and welcome to The Other Side. I'm Farah Kilidar, CEO of the World Affairs Council of Greater Houston. Thanks to our partnership with George Willey, we're able to bring notable guests and thought leaders to this global city and to your TV screen. Today, I have the pleasure of sitting down with one such thought leader who has actively worked to better the lives of women and girls, and in turn, our whole community. Layli Miller-Muro is the founder and executive director of the Tahirih Justice Center, a non-profit organization dedicated to protecting the lives of women and girls from human rights abuses through the provision of legal services and public policy advocacy. Since 2001, she has led the organization in its service to over 19,000 women and girls, growing it from a staff of 6 to over 50. Layli established Tahirih in 1997 following her involvement in a high-profile case that set national precedent and revolutionized asylum law in the United States. Fauzia Kasinja, a 17-year-old girl who had fled Tongo in fear of a forced polygamous marriage and female genital mutilation, was granted asylum in 1996 by the U.S. Board of Immigration Appeals. This decision opened the doors to gender-based persecution as grounds for asylum. Using her portion of the proceeds from a book she and Ms. Kasinja co-authored about the case, Do They Hear You When You Cry?, Layli established Tahirih. Prior to establishing Tahirih, Layli was an attorney practicing international litigation and maintaining a substantial pro bono practice. Layli, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's wonderful to have you, and it was wonderful to host you at one of our World Affairs Council events. It is my understanding that you come from a Baha'i faith, and that that faith, in some respects, you've relied on it in establishing Tahirih. You've been known to make a reference to and give an analogy of the bird and its 2 wings. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Baha'i faith and elaborate about the namesake, Tahirih?
Sure. Well, the Baha'i faith is a global religion. There are about 6 million adherents. It began in the mid-1800s, and fundamentally the Baha'i faith believes in the unity of all religions. There's a notion that God kind of communicates to humanity to help us progress, remind us of values and spiritual principles that are really similar to all world religions, but that happens through teachers or prophets that come periodically throughout humanity's existence to bring these spiritual teachings. And we believe that that's an evolutionary process. Humankind 5,000 years ago looks really different than it does now. And so naturally and necessarily, we need updated teachers, not unlike a human who needs a different teacher each year that they are in a different grade in school. And so Baha'is believe in this concept of progressive revelation, the idea that God progressively reveals truth through different faiths that are relevant to the culture and the time that they exist in, but that they are not static,
right?
That they do evolve. And so in that regard, Baha'is believe in the unity of all religions. We believe in the divinity of all religions. We simply believe they were relevant to the time and the culture that they came. And so as such, in the Baha'i faith, Baha'u'llah, who's the prophet founder, when he came in the 1800s, brought new teachings. He reinforced the spiritual teachings that exist in all faiths and are consistent with all faiths, but then applied those same spiritual teachings to a more updated current context. Now this is, still mid-1800s in Persia, so the world was very different then. But even so, the Baha'i faith believes strongly, for example, in the equality of women and men. And so the Baha'i faith is the only global religion that unambiguously, from its inception in its divine scripture, proclaims the equality of women and men. And there are a lot of scriptures around what that means, but one of them is an analogy underscoring the importance of the equality of women and men that discusses civilization as a bird, and this bird has 2 wings. One is female and one is male. And until both of these wings of civilization, of society, are equally strong, the bird will remain handicapped and unable to soar to its fullest potential. A few things about that analogy that I particularly like include the fact that these two wings are in fact distinct. They're unique and they're different. You can't stick the right wing of a bird on its left side or the left wing on its right side. They're different wings, but they do have to be equally strong. They do have to be coordinated in order for the bird to fly. Also, in this analogy, it reinforces the point that we're all in this together. You know, violence against women, the subjugation of women, the lack of education for women, and all of those symptoms that happen because of lack of equality are not just affecting women. Right. It's a men's issue too. Men and women, we're all flopping around on the ground together, handicapped as this broken winged bird is, and we're unable to reach our fullest potential. And so this is a spiritual concept of the importance of the equality of women and men that's in the Baha'i writings that has certainly influenced my work.
That's actually really interesting. And I recall in fact, the first time I came across you was in your TED Talk. And you talked about your Baha'i faith, and you also elaborated a bit more about the word Tahirih, which is an interesting name. Where did that name come from?
So Tahirih is the name of a woman who lived in the mid-1800s. And the Tahirih Justice Center is named after her to really honor her legacy, which is quite fascinating. And I think many people don't understand her role in human history as a feminist, particularly Eastern feminist. But Tahirih was known for many things. She was a child prodigy. She memorized the Quran by the time she was 13, which is thicker than the New Testament of the Bible. And she would argue theology with some of the top imams and theologians of the time in the mid-1800s in then Persia. She, of course, wasn't allowed to be seen, so these arguments would happen from behind a black curtain. But she was considered incredibly smart and a genius in her capacity to comprehend and understand and then articulate arguments, particularly as they related to the status of women. She was also known for being a poet. In fact, her poetry today is studied. If anyone, I talked to a friend recently who was taking Farsi, studying the Persian language at a university, and it's her poetry that is studied as people learn the language along with Rumi and other poets. She was
and of
also,
course that never translates appropriately with
yeah,
this,
the Persian language and the English language don't equate poetically in a way, and so I wish I spoke Persian so I could really appreciate the poetry. But she was also known for being very beautiful, but most importantly, she was an advocate for a dramatic change in the status of women. And she, in her most famous act of defiance, publicly removed her veil. Women, of course, were veiled at that time. She publicly removed her veil before an assemblage of men at a conference, and the act was considered so shocking at the time that a man who was in the audience stood up and he slit his own throat at the sight of her because it was considered so dishonorable just to look at her face. And that gives you a glimpse into the cultural reality that she existed in and how even more exceptional her own actions and courage were. She would organize women announcing that a new day had dawned, and she, of course, was speaking not only from kind of a political, tactical perspective, but also a spiritual perspective. She was one of the first believers in the Baha'i faith, and her role in the Baha'i faith is very similar to being one of the 12 disciples of Christ. She was known as one of the very first 19 in the Baha'i context believers.
As a converter from?
Yes.
Okay.
This is at the birth of the faith.
Right.
And she then, among those 19, was the only woman and was very vocal and outspoken in spreading the word. She ultimately was executed for her promotion of women's rights, her faith, and her leadership. Her last recorded words at her execution were, "You can kill me as soon as you like, but you will never stop the emancipation of women." And so that is who she is.
Wow, wow. And taking from that and the fact that she was persecuted, have Baha'is been persecuted generally in Persia?
Baha'is are heavily persecuted in Iran, now Iran. Yeah. The land, you know, it is true in all faiths. It's actually interesting that in the land of their birth, they're very persecuted. Absolutely. And that is no different for Baha'is in Iran. It is the largest religious minority in Iran. Baha'is are not allowed to go to school. They're not allowed to own property. They're not allowed to be publicly buried. Their marriages are not recognized. Nope.
Oh, wow.
Nope. It's a very, very severe degree of persecution that Baha'is suffer now. Since its inception, over 20,000 Baha'is have been executed and killed in Iran because of their faith. Because Baha'u'llah came after Muhammad, Baha'is are considered to be heretical. Right. And that is punishable by death. And then there's a view, of course, that there are benefits to heaven if you do kill a Baha'i. Previous faiths, Christianity, Judaism, and others, although may be persecuted as well, and are in Iran, are considered religions of the book.
Right.
And Muhammad himself talked about the divinity of Christ. Absolutely. And the divinity of Moses.
And the Quran itself talks about Christ.
The Quran itself has respect for those faiths. So in Iran, constitutionally, those faiths have protection, and the people of those faiths are believed to have souls, where Baha'is have a different status that actually has led to an incredible degree of persecution, and by the United Nations, a finding of genocide.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's amazing, actually. You don't hear of it often.
It's not often in the press.
No, no. Yeah. And I suppose that comes from the understanding, the perception in Islam that the Prophet Muhammad was the last of all prophets.
Right.
So any religion that came after that, they're deemed heretic. Yeah. That's very sad to hear. Mm-hmm. But just taking from that, and you know, you've taken the name of this lady who's obviously you know, had her presence in history. You were talking about human rights abuses of women and girls, and there's a quote that you used that I thought was quite poignant. You said that the types of abuses are many, they're expressed differently, and that creativity has been endless, which is really a horrible notion when you think of abuse. Can you just elaborate a bit more about the types of abuses you're really referencing and what the numbers are?
Sure. So, I mean, statistically, we know that 1 out of every 3 women globally is a victim of violence. And so that is a staggering number in terms of proportion. The way that's expressed, of course, does differ from culture to culture and society to society, but no culture, no religion, no class, no community is immune from violence against women. But violence against women, in my view, is really simply a symptom of the larger ailment of the lack of equality of women and men. Of course, if women and men were equally respected and treated, there wouldn't be that subjugation or the violence that we see expressed. But the creativity is kind of endless. It's endless throughout history. I mean, in Europe, we had chastity belts. Right. You know, in China, there was foot binding. Even where practices have now, by and large, gone by the wayside, there's female genital mutilation or cutting, which we see quite frequently in our caseload. There's human trafficking, both for sex work, but also for forced labor that we often see. Domestic violence, of course, we often see. Child and forced marriage is another scenario that we will often see. There really are very many forms of abuses against women, and our clients reflect that diversity.
As much as I'd hate to pause on that note, I think it's time for us to take a break.
On The Other Side, we interview a variety of people and seek to examine their beliefs, their opinions, and their passions. Then we invite them to come with us to the other side and look at the antithesis of their views. What comes out is an in-depth conversation without the vitriol of the talk shows, but a cerebral engaging of ideas you will not find anywhere else. Come join us on alternate Saturdays on this channel. If you'd like to recommend a guest for The Other Side, contact us at the email address on the screen.
Welcome back. Speaking of the cases you've come across most often, can you tell us a bit more about how Tahirih does its work? In our introduction of you, we mentioned that you've helped approximately 19,000 women and girls, yet with a staff of 50. How do you get to do that?
Well, the Tahirih Just Center has been around for 19 years. And what we do is provide free legal advocacy and defense for women and girls who are courageously saying no and standing up against violence and have sought help. So these are women and girls who are saying no to female genital mutilation, where their own mother may have endured it, her mother's mother endured it. And so they're stopping a cycle of violence in maybe their cultures or their communities that will then have lasting effects for generations. Our clients are domestic violence victims who are saying no to that cycle of violence. They are powerful women, they are smart, they are courageous, but in their moment of courage, when they've decided to leave,
right,
and they have no resources, they need help. They need help with legal defense, because unfortunately our legal system is quite dependent on lawyers. And without an attorney, you are likely to lose your request for justice. Statistically, without an attorney, somebody who may be facing removal proceedings, although they may be entitled to legal protection under our laws, only have a 16% chance of success. When you have any lawyer's legal representation, the chances jump to 46%. But when you have the Tahirih Justice Center's legal representation, you have a 99% success rate. And so you can see the significance of legal representation.
Sure.
I'd like to take lawyers out of the picture completely, but until we change our whole justice system in the United States, lawyers are critical to the process. And so what we do is provide that free legal representation. We turn every dollar donated to us, however, into 4 of impact, because we partner with almost 2,000 pro bono attorneys. These are attorneys at large law firms, at corporations, in-house counsels, and they donate their time. I know people make a lot of jokes about lawyers, and it's a hard thing to conceive of a lawyer having a good heart. But in fact, most people went to law school because they cared about justice, and to do this work feeds their soul. And so they'll volunteer with us, and they have the opportunity to provide free legal representation to women and girls who are fleeing abuse. And their partnership with us maximizes our capacity, it multiplies our ability to do the work. We have a little over 50 staff. Currently, we are in Houston, Texas, we're in Washington, D.C., and we're in Baltimore. We're about to open up an office in San Francisco. And we're litigating around 700 cases at any given time. And we're able to do that with the pro bono assistance. We do also provide our legal services in a holistic way. And what that means is that we provide a range of legal services, but also all of our clients have access to social workers. Right. Because we know that justice is only partially found in the courtroom, and really to have full justice, clients need help rebuilding their lives, getting on their feet, and surviving during the pendency of their case.
And what time frame are we talking about? I mean, how long do these cases last from the moment you come across, or a person comes to you, to the moment of resolution? What are we talking?
Cases take anywhere from a year to 6 to 7 years to litigate. Right now, unfortunately, the world is experiencing a refugee crisis unlike we have seen since World War II. And so the numbers are astronomical, and the United States is also seeing those statistics rise. We're not one of the largest recipient countries globally of refugees, but even still, our numbers have been increasing. But the number of immigration judges, our whole immigration infrastructure has not increased proportionally, and so it can't handle the numbers. And right now, our asylum cases, for example, are being scheduled for trial dates in 2021.
Oh my goodness.
And so there's horrible delay.
And what happens in the meantime to these people? Where are they?
In the meantime, clients languish in poverty, they are able to work after an asylum case has been filed after 180 days.
Okay.
So they have to wait 6 months before they can begin working or have work authorization. It creates really an impossible situation for somebody who has suffered greatly. And but then, even when they have work authorization, they're desperately waiting for their case to be adjudicated. And until their case is adjudicated, their own status is uncertain. So their ability to pursue education or jobs is uncertain. But most importantly, they are unable to bring relatives into the country. And so a lot of our clients have children that they've left behind. People leave under emergent conditions. Only one can escape. The hope is they'll receive protection and send back from them. But just recently, I learned that one of our clients, her son was executed by gang members in Honduras, and it was to protect him that she came to the United States. And so this delay is not only anxiety-producing, poverty-imposing, it is also deadly because people are fleeing for their lives and the violence doesn't stop.
And it's unbelievable that it's happening right here at our doorstep. In fact, you just mentioned the migration crisis that we've heard quite a bit about in Europe. Multiple stories of children drowning as they're trying to escape, and hundreds of thousands of refugees at one border or another. Yet we don't often hear about this happening right at our doorstep, all the refugees that are coming from south of the border. Can you speak a bit more about that, as well as people's perception of what or who these refugees are?
So I think, you know, the Syrian refugee crisis is catastrophic and it is tragic. It has also been well filmed, well photographed, and well documented. And it is also something that's happening over there that those Europeans should care more about. So it's kind of an easier attribution. But what's happening at our borders, just to put it in perspective, Obama, in the best case scenario, was proposing to Congress that we accept 10,000 Syrian refugees. Over the last 2 years alone, the United States has in fact had 100,000 unaccompanied children refugees arriving through our southern border from Central American countries whose level of violence, they are the murder capitals of the world, and their level of violence is greater than war-torn Syria. So we're kind of missing some of the obvious tragedies that are happening. I think unfortunately many people don't appreciate that the migration, which in past years may have been economic, may have been tied to Mexico, are currently tied to war levels of violence from Central American countries, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. Also, those who are fleeing, while certainly inclusive of some adults, are in large numbers unaccompanied children. And so, again, it's hard to pit issues, but the Syrian refugees leaving are often leaving as family units.
Correct.
The children that are coming across the border often they're being raised sometimes by aunts, uncles, and grandparents. Maybe their parents have already come to the United States in years past. They're then seeking their parents. Or a child is being sent in advance. So it is a common practice among many refugees who are fleeing for their lives, if they can only afford to get one out, it will be their child.
Right,
they care more about their child and their child's future than they even do about themselves. And so they will pay for the smuggler to get their child out, first and foremost. And that's what we're experiencing, is that it is children completely unaccompanied who are coming. It is an 11-year-old girl holding the hand of her 6-year-old brother, and they are walking from Honduras all the way through to Mexico. And the numbers are absolutely staggering. And what I shared with you are the numbers coming from the government with regard to how many have arrived and how many they are incarcerating, by the way, and
so
massive
they arrive,
detention
they're on
facilities.
the border, then they are incarcerated in
And they're being incarcerated in massive detention facilities run by the American Corrections Corporation of America, who lobbies hard to have these correctional facilities built. And we are jailing women and children in very large numbers. But what's important to understand is that 100,000 over the last 2 years, for example, is just the tip of the iceberg, because in fact, last year, the Obama administration paid billions of dollars to the Mexican government to line up enforcement at the border of Mexico and Central American countries to prevent the migration through Mexico. So according to UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugee numbers, the Mexican government is turning away hundreds of thousands of refugees that would have gotten to the United States because of direct U.S. funding to prevent them from getting here.
And God knows what happens to those children once they get to that point.
Right.
Because then they are obviously trying to escape. They're being stopped.
That's right. So what we're seeing are only the lucky ones who get through the system.
Lucky, and yet they're incarcerated for, what are we talking here? How long?
It depends. I mean, sometimes it can be a few weeks, it can be a few months, it can be multiple, it can be up to a year. But the problem with incarceration is that those being detained have no due process rights. And so there's no right to legal counsel, there's no right to hour of exercise a day. They may go for months without seeing daylight, food provision, medical provision. All of these things are quite abusive. There are lawsuits that are publicly available that document all of this abuse, but I don't think it's actually getting the press that it should be getting because the stories are horrendous and most Americans really don't know
And these
happening.
detention centers that you're talking about, they are right here in Texas, for instance.
Most of them are in Texas.
And this is the #1 state, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of...
Yeah, Arizona and others are included, but some of the largest detention facilities are here in Texas.
As part of the child trafficking that is going on, is that, I mean, do they get, I mean, some of the resources through some of these unaccompanied minors? Are the two linked? Is there a link between the two abuses?
Well, the forms of abuse are linked. Right. So the gangs in Central America, which are the de facto government now and kind of running the countries, they make their money largely off of drug and human trafficking. And so the business of the gangs is tied to trafficking. And so what a lot of our clients who are women and girls are fleeing is sexual violence. And they are fleeing human trafficking situations. And so I think it is those practices and those realities in Central America that are leading in part to migration, in addition to the subjugation of women more generally, but rates of violence against women and girls is staggering in those countries.
It is amazing the work that you do, significant impact, and I hope that it increases and you get more and more support. It is my understanding that there isn't a lack of lawyers, and there isn't, of course, a lack of women and girls in need of help. It's the resources and the capacity that is needed.
That's right.
On behalf of George Willey and all of us at the World Affairs Council of Greater Houston, thank you for joining us today on The Other Side. We look forward to seeing you again with our next guest.